Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you happen to be watching this. Risco in Tokyo coming at you with kind of a bit of a tutorial looking at how I set up these patrolling enemies with their different types of behavior and how they can be modified for work in your levels, making them move around as you'd like at different speeds as you'd like them, and also making them dangerous. Because, you know, what's the use of having a patrolling enemy if you're not going to make them dangerous? Also because I've spent like a couple of weeks working on that fish, and I'll be gosh darn if I don't show it off just a little bit. What if the level never gets published? So here we go. Have you ever said to yourself, girl, I've always wanted to see fish guts. I want to know what fish guts are like. Well, this girl has got the answer for you, because the fish guts are... Okay, actually there's quite a lot to the fish guts. There's a lot of moving parts here, but they all break down relatively simply. Now, we've got our main bits here. The fish that you see is actually not anything special at all. It's not important at all. It is a dephysicalized piece of cardboard. We've got facing to the left for when it's moving left. We've got it facing to the right when it's moving right. Now, if you're using an enemy that has a more symmetrical shape, like we've got this Evangelion type angel here, you wouldn't need to worry about that section of it. You wouldn't have to worry about like how it looks where it faces, but obviously the fish, we're going to want to make sure that it's facing in the right direction. So we've got the dephysicalized bits of fish. We've got two sticker panels in the same shape as the fish. This is probably overdoing it just a little bit, but these are part of the murder system of the fish, basically because originally I had our fish on a physics tweaker to not have any collisions except with the sack thing, but the problem I found was, and I was using that to impact sensor trigger a kill switch on it to kill the sack thing, but the problem was that if it just hit the sack thing, you know, from the front when it was doing a dash, that was no problem, but if I jumped on it, it would actually like throw it down a little bit lower, and it would throw off its behavior later on. So I needed, since it was a physical object, it was cardboard, I needed to actually dephysicalize it, but dephysicalized objects don't work with impact sensors, so we've got these extra bits here that are going to be triggering our kills. Again, now with this enemy, for example, because it has no real physical body, we didn't really need to do that, and we could just put the kill sensors directly on here. But that's how we're basically killing things. We've got some AND gates that are combining the danger tag, because in my levels I wanted players to be able to make it dangerous or not dangerous, and then we've got, depending on what direction it's moving, if it's charging or not, and those are going to the OR gate, because if it's going from the right or it's going from the left, and then that'll actually kill when it hits the actual player. So there's that bit. That's our murder. Murder is important for enemies, like not for real life. Don't be murdering in real life. Properties here is not really all that important to us. It's just an anti-grav so that the cardboard doesn't fall through the world, and it's a gyroscope so you know that it stays pointing in the directions that we want it to point in. Now we're moving into more important bits here. We've got our movement. And movement is a really neat example, I find, of using nodes to allow for more granularity when you're feeding into things with different types of outputs, like advanced movers, or well, any type of mover, wobble bolts, pistons, where like with positional on pistons, and if you wanted it at like 3 different heights, you could use these nodes to allow for that. Basically, what we've got in our system are 3 batteries, one at 20%, one at 50%, and one at 100%, feeding into 3 nodes going into an OR gate, all feeding into the positive side of our direction combiner, and then into another 3 nodes into another OR gate, feeding into the negative side. So the positive side, when it's getting a signal, will push it to the right at whatever percentage signal that it's receiving, and on the bottom here it'll push it to the left for whatever percentage signal that it is receiving. And those signals are coming from these tag sensors. Now, The tag sensors are only dealing with things in the chip. So the way that I have them set up is at a 0.0. So they'll not take anything outside of the microchip and detect tags in same microchip because we want to be triggered from things that are happening elsewhere in the chip. But if you were using, for example, like a central hub, a central bit of logic that was going to be telling it what to do, then you'd want to change the ranges on it to reflect that. Now, with this setup, we can get an awful lot of granularity. I've only got 3 different speeds that are feeding in. We've got 2 speeds for patrol, and then we've got 1 speed when it's actually dashing at the player, but we can add in as many batteries as we would like, as long as we've got something that's providing the battery an input, through these nodes, and the selector just to keep it from, being all over the place, and we could have like 5 or 6 different speeds or more, depending on how granular that you really want to get things. So that's like how we're handling the speed and how we're handling the direction of our little object. Now, to tell it like what it's actually going to be doing, and we've got another selector here with 5 ports, one that's not really doing anything, and then 4 different behavior ports. And our 4 different behaviors, we've got patrol to the right, we've got patrol to the left, we've got a dash to the right, and we've got a dash to the left. Now the patrols to the right and left, those are coming from in environment. I wanted them to be very small, very granular, so that I wouldn't be triggering too many enemies at the same time. These are all set to 0 layers so that they could be on a thin layer. And you notice, for example, our fish here is not being triggered by this one because it's in the wrong layer, basically. Also because the range on the tag sensor is set pretty low. It's set to 3, which is not particularly wide. I find it's very reasonable to do. Now, our behaviors here, and we'll just take a look at the right patrol, for example. So we've got our sequencer. This sequencer is set onto a loop. So basically, until it hits another trigger, for example, the left patrol trigger, it's going to keep on looping through these behaviors. So we're telling it to go at 20% movement speed to the right. The null sets it at no input to the advanced mover. So because our advanced mover is set to 40% decel, it kind of slows down a little bit. It doesn't get to a dead stop, but you'd want to play around with that a little bit so that it's going to be getting the effect that you want. And maybe if it's a more robotic enemy, for example, maybe you would want it to be at 100% decel so that it would just stop dead when it's not getting an input. So it's going to be going slow to the right, pause, slow to the right again, pause. Now we've got it at a 50% speed, so it's moving a little bit quicker to the right. It'll stop getting speed input again, and then it'll loop around to the front, and it'll keep doing that. Slow, pause, quick, pause, slow, quick, pause, slow, pause, until it's going to hit something that's going to change that behavior. And now we see with the leftward movements, and it's exactly the same. But we could change this up. We could put any type of tag trigger in here to match the speeds that we want. Maybe we wanted to go quick, slow, quick, for example, or quick, pause, slow, for example. You could just change up your tags and get that granularity of behavior that you want. This can go on as long as you want it, but basically these are going to be on loops so that you can have their patrol paths to be relatively long, but you could make the patrol path a lot shorter as well, and that's why we've got these on movable bits of sticker panel. So we'll see that this one kind of slows down. It's got a shorter path now when it hits the trigger. Now, our dashing, our actual attack patterns, are coming from impact sensors on these bit of sticker materials that jut out from the front of our fish. So this gives us basically their notice range. Whenever a sack thing is going to enter into this box, it's going to change the behavior over to its attack. And we'll see that here, that it backs up a little bit, then it charges forward, which is exactly what happens. We've got a pause, a reverse, just a slow, short reverse, and then we've got that dash forward. Now, this is not set to loop, because once it hits the dash forward, we want to keep it dashing forward until it hits one of its patrol tags, and then it's going to go back into patrol behavior unless the player does the jump too short, and that would trigger the charge in the opposite direction. Now, to make sure that none of these are giving off signals when we don't want them to, we've got these OR gates that are resetting whenever one of the other behaviors is triggered. So we see it is on the left, this one's on a left patrol, but if we hit the rightward patrol, and that's going to turn off all the other behaviors so that it's only going to have the right patrol sequencer is going to be on. Now, the last bit here is basically just visual fluff for me, but I wanted to make sure, as we mentioned before, I wanted to make sure that the fish was going to be, the appearance of the fish was going to be matching the direction that it was intending to head in. So, on our fish bit, on our actual fish, we've got 2 opacity tweakers. We've got one that's set to 0%, and we've got one that's set to, for me, 55%, because I wanted this to be kind of like a ghost fish, so I didn't want it to be fully visible. But like we see, for example, this one here, and this is fully visible because it's kind of like a robot object. But when it's heading in the appropriate direction, it's going to be getting the signal at 55. When it's heading in the opposite direction, the 0% opacity tweaker will be triggered, and that side of it will be invisible. So for example, the way that it's set up here, this one was, when I captured it, heading to the right, so the leftward side is no longer visible. So now we've got this pretty neatly animated, if I do say so myself, fish or enemy that can be made hazardous or non-hazardous and can have a number of different behaviors. Sometimes they do get hung up if they get too close to patrol behavior. They will get hung up there, so you do want to be a little bit careful with that when you're setting their actual patrol routes in-game. And those routes, I've got it set down just to a nice simple 4, 2 patrols and 2 dashes, but you could add in a number of different patrol route behaviors and, for example, have those triggered off from a hub someplace, have them triggered from something in the environment, that it doesn't have to be just this simple, one leftward patrol and one rightward patrol. You could do a lot of different things there. But, yeah, I was really proud of this. It's just something that, I think is a good example of logic that looks really daunting when you've kind of got it all out like this, and it looks like a lot of spaghetti, but if you do take things like one step at a time, you think, what behavior do I want it to have at what times, and what would trigger that behavior, and just take it one step, and you can make something that has a lot of precision in it. You can make something that has a lot of granularity in it, and also a lot of, hopefully, charm and character that your players are going to notice. And just to give an example of why it takes me so long to get everything finished, I spent all morning, I got this fish done, I was like, I want to show this fish off. We should do a little neat little thing. And so then I spent another couple of hours putting together this little scene in a bathhouse, because this is what I do with my life, and this is the kind of person that I am. But I hope that you got something out of this. I hope that you got some ideas for things that you can use in your levels, or just some things that might be inspiring to you for whatever, your little LBP art. But this is mine, and I'm glad I had the chance to share it with you. But that pretty much does it for us here this go about. So from me, Disco, here in Tokyo, to all of you out there, wherever you may happen to be, thank you, arigato, sayonara, see you, and ciao.